Hi, Greg.
Hello, I'm in my car today.
Oh, great. I'm
I
at
got
home.
good signal out here.
I'm at home.
Maybe we won't get cut off. I get good signal out here.
Today's Friday, the 27th of January. It's not a full moon. The moon's about 40% illuminated tonight. So it's almost half a moon. I wanted to make this video about when I became a publisher and when Elvis Presley died. And I'd already been playing with my band Bottomline for about, I don't know, 7 years. We were being played on the radio, and I was a writer and composer member at ASCAP in New York, and BMI in London. It was, I think, in Canada, it was Astra. In London, I used Stationers Hall. And I was pretty much all over the world with federal licenses. And I had a band called Bottomline, and we were playing at a place called Cupid's Den that my friend Gene drove a milk truck my father built at Divco for Twin Pines. And he hired me when I was about 3. I would drive around with him, and he'd pay me money so I could feed my family. My father was never home, never brought a paycheck home. And my mother would have me sell flowers door to door out of her garden. In pots she would get from around the community. When they threw away the pots in a local cemetery, she'd collect them, and then she'd put her flowers in them and send me door to door to sell flowers. And then her friend Gene come along, and he gave me a job on his milk truck. And he paid me money to run the milk and the bread and the butter up to the doors from his Twin Pines milk truck, or the eggs, whatever people bought. And that's how I fed my little brothers and sisters, and even my older brothers and sisters in Oakland County, Michigan, selling flowers and delivering milk for a milkman named Gene. Gene built the club we played in, Cupid's Den. And my band played there with groups like Badfinger. And nobody in my band knew that Gene was the milkman who gave my band a contract to play there and then put us on the radio. And my band members didn't know I was affiliated with ASCAP and BMI either. I didn't tell people my business from my schools. And I was newly married because the mayor of East Detroit, his daughter had raped me and come back and told me she was pregnant, and she wanted me to give her money for an abortion. And I told her, you raped me to begin with. And I said, that's my kid, I'll marry you. So I married her. And my Catholic Church wouldn't marry me to my pregnant East Detroit mayor's daughter, Nancy Fredericks. And her father at that time was Joe Jacobs of IBM, and Suarez had been mayor of East Detroit, her previous father, and her real father was Fredericks from New York. And Nancy was kind of slow because she was the first open heart surgery in New York. Back in 1953, her doctor made a mechanical heart and put it in her chest the day she was born, because her mother had German measles. And Nancy Fredericks will be in the medical history books in New York. But when they put the heart in her, they didn't know what they were doing. They cut her across her chest this way and across the back of her shoulder, and took her shoulder out to put the new mechanical heart in her. And Nancy lived to be about almost 60, maybe 60. And she was murdered by the same bikers that murdered my 3 wives, Kiki, Terry, and Victoria. Nancy was my last wife who was murdered. Back when I became a publisher, Nancy, I had a Warren policeman who was supposed to be protecting my life because two people attempted to murder me. They left me for dead and stole my car and then stole an airplane and used the airplane to try and pick up drugs, and they got caught and went to jail. And these were two guys that went to school with me. I was 16, maybe 15 at the time, and teaching school in Warren Consolidated. And these were two seniors at the high school I went to who drugged me and tried to kill me and stole my car. And that's when the world got Jack Nicholson, and one of the people that tried to murder me was Nicholson. And I knew these people from church in my high school where I taught school. I taught in Warren Consolidated, electronics and science. This policeman who was supposed to be protecting my life, I come home one day and he was having sex with my wife in front of my daughter in a wheelchair. And we'd only been married about a week. So it really upset me. I turned around and walked out. Lost my friend from high school who was a police detective, and my wife on the same day. And I didn't divorce her because of the sex. She went and lived with this guy by the name of Akers for about 2 weeks, and I'm sure she had sex with him for the 2 weeks she was with him. And then he kicked her out, and she came running back to me and wanted to stay married. I didn't divorce her at that time. And about a year later, she come up behind me and stabbed me in the back with a knife and pushed me down 2 flights of stairs. In our home, she had built this story up in her head that I was cheating on her, and I wasn't. I was working 2 jobs, and I was gone 20 hours a day working 2 jobs to support her because she didn't work, and we had 2 kids by then. And I'm pretty sure the second kid was Akers' son, from when she went and lived with him and had sex with him every day for 2 weeks. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think I am. At that time, when I divorced Nancy, nobody knew she stabbed me in the back. Nobody knew that she was having sex with Akers and living with him. And, I didn't tell people my business. I just kept playing at Gene's Club, Cupid's Den, which became Sherry's Lounge. And then Sherry Waldo died next to me, and the Waldo family is, I believe they're part of my family here in the United States. And the world had Waldo Pepper in a book. And then when I was at Robin Williams' home in LA recently, about 4 years ago, I believe he was murdered. His wife wanted a divorce. He was murdered as I went by his house. And then I got back home and found Sherry Waldo dead next door to me. And then they renamed the Waldo Bridge to Robin Williams Bridge. And that's too synchronous to be coincidental murders in my life. Going back
And I
to
was in a tunnel with them. Yeah.
Going back to Nancy, she stabbed me in the back, pushed me down 2 flights of stairs, attempting to murder me. And she did this from behind. My whole family, when I divorced her, I left her and divorced her. I gave her the house, I gave her a car, didn't attempt to take the 2 kids from her, and I divorced her in court with Judge Hunter's stare. and Judge Campbell. And I did it through friend of the court, and I was paying her child support. At this time, my whole family in secret stole my business, Bottomline. And I had trademarked Bottomline with Weiner and Associates out at Dire Straits' house on Telegraph Road. When I performed with Del Towers, who was my chorus teacher, I played drums for Del Towers at Warren High. And the people in my band didn't know I did these things. So I made Bottomline my trademark, and my parents must have helped them, and my best friends and my own family members stole my business. And they did it behind my back. You understand this? Nobody told me they were stealing Bottomline, which I had just trademarked with Weiner and Associates. And this is back in, I don't know, 1967. I was 15, 16 years old. I had walked across the street and hired an attorney while I played at a club with the chorus at Warren High with Del Towers when the music event was over across the street in that lounge our high school was performing in for a dinner party. I walked across the street to Weiner and Associates, hired them to protect my trademark Bottomline. He took the money and ran off to New York. And then the next thing I know from Weiner was years later, he was put in jail for exposing himself to underage kids online while married to Aberdeen. And that was Clinton's buddy. Lawyers stole my trademark and my publishing license and my IRS licenses and even my birth name all over the globe. I was in 242 countries. As my family, my little brother and my two best friends replaced me in my business with the help of my parents and their parents. And I had over 600 relatives, and they had to practice with this guy who replaced me for 3 or 4 months. So everybody knew they were replacing me. And as I divorced Nancy, who had tried to murder me. And
The band was replacing you as a drummer.
right. I was the drummer. And I'd played music and drums from kindergarten through college. And I was making, I don't know, $6,000 a week working for Gene, who was the milk truck driver who built Cupid's Den. And my friends and my family members, the only person that knew that was my mother. Gene was my mother's friend. And then we were being
the same Gene that hired you milk truck. This is the guy that built.
Yeah, he built the lounge my band played in. And we had a contract with him. So they figured they could steal my trademark Bottomline, my publishing license and IRS license, only they didn't know that I had all that. So they replaced me with a guy named Westfall, and Westfall was dead within a week or 2 weeks. And then they asked me to come back to my own business after he died. And then the first day I was with them there, Russell, who appointed Manning and Nichols to head the JFK archives, he died at a table drinking across from me. And the members of the band in Bottomline, my business, they didn't know I was a publisher. And in New York, Frank Sinatra and Ted Kennedy and Morton Gould made me a publisher. And they didn't know any of this in Foley Federal Court. So as I became a publisher and we were being played on the radio in Detroit and Pontiac and working in lounges like Continentals, and we worked in Premiere for the Biondo brothers. That was Premiere Networks before Art Bell was hired. Everybody who knew me stole my name and my business and my trademark and my federal publishing license from a federal court. And I didn't prosecute them because they were my friends and my own family, including my parents. Both my mother and father helped them do this, or they couldn't have practiced at my father's home. And I was paying my mother and father to practice there. As I divorced Nancy, and you had Nancy Sinatra singing about these boots are made for walking. One day they're going to walk all over you. That wasn't coincidence in my life, because Nancy's father was mayor of East Detroit, and all the rock and rollers, including Sonny and Cher, got their start from that mayor. And Sonny and Cher, her mother was Mrs. Holt, and Holt is the detective that covered up the murder of Terry Heath and my wife Victoria on the Civil War ranch. She just disappeared and never filed my wife's murder charges, as Tom Garrett at CBS destroyed my income online. And as my attorney I hired to file murder charges with the district attorney in Tennessee was murdered. And this was 20 years after my entire family stole my life. And then I went back and played with my business Bottomline, hired a new bass player because Jeff Westfall was my little brother's friend from high school, or junior high school. And they had all replaced me at my own business illegally. That was illegal for them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I was paying taxes, they weren't, et cetera, et cetera. I had a federal license, the military backed me, and I was about to publish the music on the radio as they stole my life. And that allowed DuPont, who made the milk truck I was delivering him when I was 3 for Gene, who made the club we were playing in 65, 66, 67. That same milk truck driver worked for DuPont and Milky the Clown, who was Claire Cummins. DuPont and Cummins stole my trademark with Pepper and Snedowski, Ellen Pepper, and a guy named Stanley Snedowski. In New York, as Weiner and Associates didn't protect my trademark and went off to New York, exposing himself to little kids online. And DuPont created a WWF, and that was the World Wildlife Federation stolen trademark, and my stolen trademark Bottomline. But when he did that, Claire Cummins and Sylvia Cummins were raping little kids in Oakland County and all the way up into Michigan State University, Brighton, Michigan, Ypsilanti. Sylvia Cummins, she got caught and went to jail for 30 years. And it was introduced to me by the sheriff who was married to Connie, the girl who owned the Cougar cat in the Ford commercials on the Cougar car back then. So all of this is interrelated with the theft of my business, and it all goes back to 57 when I was kidnapped by the families of 5 governors, tortured and raped, and they beat my twin to death in Oakland County, Michigan. And then L. Brooks Patterson covered all that up. And this guy Westfall was a friend of Osborne, and he was delivering porno in his plane. And they figured they'd replace me with him because he had a plane and they could go on tour across the country, as I became a publisher at ASCAP BMI with a federal license from Foley Federal Court. And they didn't know any of this. They didn't know that Frank Sinatra and Ted Kennedy and Morton Gould had made me a publisher in Foley Federal Court. I didn't tell them. I was just going to surprise them and publish the music. That never come about. And there's more to this story. After I started playing with Bottomline again, and I replaced my little brother who stole my trademark and my name as I became a publisher. and helped DuPont and 2,500 American corporations via Osborne and Long and Wallace, the governors who had kidnapped me. They all stole my trademark on the same day, as my little brother and my friends and my mother and father tried to steal my business. And I'd already had my business for, I don't know, 10, 12 years prior to them, with a guy named Rennie and Doug Bach, like the composer Bach. That was the first Bottomline band. And they both became CIA agents when I hired new musicians for Bottomline. And that would have been Kowalski, my little brother, and a guy by the name of Robert Wood. And my little brother married Donna Massey, and that's when the world got Madonna, as he married Donna Massey in Rochester, Michigan. And I used to go to the same restaurant Madonna would frequent in Rochester. And the Locrecio family in Rochester made Madonna. And I went to kindergarten with Locrecio. So I know the whole history of this. And then my wife's father was mayor of East Detroit, and all the rockers came out of East Detroit, people like Nugent, Alice Cooper. And they marked me everywhere as they stole my publishing license. And my publishing license was 28,000 worldwide entertainment contracts worth well over $3 trillion. They were multi-million-dollar contracts. And my own parents didn't know I was a publisher because I was already moved out of the house, married to Nancy with 2 kids, and I divorced her. And they took my divorces. They probably thought I wasn't being a good father because I didn't tell them Nancy had attempted to murder me, or that Akers was having sex with her every time I went to work, or went to work at the lounge at night. The police detective was having sex with her. So nobody, my friends and family, didn't know these things until I decided to tell them when I came back to my stolen business. And by then it was too late. My trademark was being used by 2,500 corporations all over the globe. Somebody tried to shoot me driving down the street when I came back, the day that Russell, who gave you Manning and Garrison to head to JFK archives, he died sitting at a table to me, trying to prove to me how much he could drink. He drank himself to death. And my whole life has been like this. I'm Hugh Squire. I own the trademark for Bottomline, and everyone, all my friends and my entire family of 600 members stole my business from me. You got people like Axl Rose, because my band would play on the Rose farm, and the Beatles sang songs about Rita Rose, and Rita Rose was my dad's sister. You got Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, so the Beatles sang "Lovely Rita Rose," and then you have Guns N' Roses. Yeah, it makes sense.
Well, as all my family members stole my business, you got Axl Rose and the other Rose people in music, and none of them played music. The only person in the Rose family that played music was the mother, Rita Rose, and she played accordion. She didn't play rock and roll. She played polkas. So it was real funny as the Rose family murdered their own father, growing marijuana in his cornfields on his farm in New Haven, Michigan. The Rose family took over my place on the radio, as my entire family stole my business, Bottomline, worldwide. And the military was backing me, and that military would have been Nichols and McVeigh and others.
Would they be related to Pete Rose in baseball also?
Yeah, Pete Rose was my cousin, and my next wife, her cousin was Foytak, who was shortstop and a pitcher and a catcher back then. Yeah, there was baseball players, and then when I left Westhouse for uh, Kiki Nelson, uh, our friend was Al Kaline from the Detroit Tigers, and he was batting champion of the world at that time. He had a restaurant, and I and Karen would go visit Al Kaline. And then, if you notice, I'm Bottomline, and then all the trains got Kaline on the sides of them back when I and Kiki started dating after I divorced Mary Westhouse.
Would these roses also be Clarence Rose, your cousin that piloted the USS Enterprise?
Yeah, Clarence Rose piloted the Enterprise. My cousin Schofield ran Camp Lejeune, and my brother-in-law Tony was a big part of running Fort Knox during the Vietnam War. And all of this was in my life as Frank Sinatra and Ted Kennedy and Morton Gould made me a publisher. And the Gould and Stargate didn't exist on that day. They were in the process of making the Gould and the Stargate movies as they made me a publisher. And Morton Gould signed my publishing license in Foley Federal Court. And then you did some research and you found that Foley made a Santa Claus movie right in Sterling Heights as they stole my trademark Bottomline for Bottomline events.
Yeah, it just fits hand in glove with everything you've been saying
Yeah, and
about
then
how.
when I was 4 years old, Santa Claus would rape me in schools I went to. He'd put me in a janitor's closet and rape me. And his name was Edward Rutz. So all of this fits together with the theft of Bottomline and my twin being murdered in Oakland County. He was the first or maybe the second kid murdered in Oakland County, and he was murdered in 57, not in the 70s. And Timmy King was murdered in Oakland County, and that would have been President Ford's family. And then my friend Ted Oglesby, who was L. Brooks Patterson's own family, his mother was Mrs. Patterson. L. Brooks Patterson hung him in a jail cell because I told him that his uncle was sitting out in a squad car as 5 governors tortured and beat me and raped me with their penises. And I was handed over to those people by my elementary school, Mrs. Long and Wallace, Mrs. Schultz, and then the world got Schultz on Hogan's Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Just recently, my next door neighbor here, where I live on the West Coast, that was Vic Morrow's nephew. His name was Randy Morrow. He just died 2 weeks ago. He was my friend here, Vic Morrow's kid, and that was Combat back in the 50s and 60s on TV. And I've known all these people all my life because Gardner was my family, and Gardner married Frank Sinatra. And then my mother's whole family, they created the real Texas Rangers, but they aren't given credit for it. And they came from Mexico City, Gonzalez, and he sold Mexican food all over the country through Borman Foods, which was food fairs and big stores like that. You know, like nowadays you have Walmarts. Back then you had Borman Foods before the Clinton. Mm-hmm. My whole family, my mother's whole family was murdered on Clinton River Road, leaving church. And then the members of the Gonzalez family who were still alive, they went back and ran them over with semis in their driveway in New Haven, Michigan. And that's not too far from where Jimmy Hoffa was buried under my horse. And Jimmy Hoffa was my family member, as was people like Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra and Mickey Rooney. And I worked with the Kennedy family in sessions of Congress as a publisher. And nobody in my family knew these things. They just figured they were stealing their older brother's money. They stole my inheritance. My Aunt Gonzalez and Christy and my brother, half-brother Zabicki, they stole my inheritance. After stealing my trademark Bottomline, as I became a publisher via Frank Sinatra. And then my band, they replaced me with Aaron as I stopped the Utica gun and drug trade. And Aaron Presley had just died on a toilet, like I was chained to one by 5 governors, as I stopped the drug trade. And Elvis was getting his drugs via a little yellow island north of Kathmandu Bob Seger was singing about. And 2 women had tried to murder me in front of Bob Seger's house about 4 years prior. And all of this is truth, but nobody knows the truth because the U.S. government and my own family stole my trademark right out of the Library of Congress with Weiner and Associates in front of Dire Straits' house. And Dire Straits wrote a song about, we got to sell these TVs. Look at that faggot. Look at that yo-yo. Look at that monkey. He's a millionaire. He was singing about me as I made the trademark Bottomline with Weiner Associates. And I was 14, 15 years at the time at Weiner and Associates on Telegraph Road, not far from where they took off out of the Sly Fox in Southfield, while my mother-in-law was his date. And then the world got Alec Baldwin on Hugh, making his first debut on Hulu. My family gave you the computers, Gates. Joe Jacobs was Nancy Frederick's father. He gave Gates the software to make his first computer at my wedding to Nancy Fredericks, who tried to murder me a week after our wedding. And for a detective in Warren, Michigan, Acres. And all of this has gone on untold in the media. Joe Jacobs, IBM, was Nancy's father. That was her mother's 5th husband. She was married to the mayor of East Detroit, married to Nancy's father, Mr. Fredericks in New York, married to Joe Jacobs, and then married to 2 more men, just as influential. And she was a broker at Century 21, get this, Greg, selling golf courses to people like Donald Trump. You got that whole picture? And her name was Betty Jacobs from New York. And then my next mother-in-law, her family was Cook and Perry, and they would spy on me as I was married to the Westhouse family. That was her cousin. And they were my college teachers, and they lived in a house I rented to them. And I didn't know they were the Westhouse family. And Westhouse, that family tried to murder me 3 times. That's why I divorced Mary after asking her to quit selling drugs. She didn't need to sell drugs. I was making $6,000 a week working for Gene, who drove the milk truck and built Cupid's Den. There was absolutely no reason for her to be selling drugs with the renegades. And she was an Apache Indian. When I divorced her, the Huey became the Apache, and that was not coincidence. My uncle was a Supreme Court justice, Justice Fuller. And he tried cases with Osborne and Westhouse and Westinghouse years before. And all of this, the Westhouse family came into my life for money.
Yeah.
Because Nancy's father had given Gates the software to make his first computer. And then when I left Mary, I lived with Ricky Nelson's cousin, Kiki, and you had Rick James singing, "She's a very Kiki girl." These things are not coincidence. I was marked all over the world, and they stole my federal publishing company along with my IRS licenses and even my birth name.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make this video to clarify all that. Do you think it clarified the fact that my entire family and every friend I had stole my business bottom line behind my back in the 60s?
Yeah, they don't have any right to like be upset and come after you as if you had done something wrong here. It was them attacking you from the very beginning.
Yeah, my own family and friends. And then I just learned that Gardner died here on the West Coast where I live in Grants Pass. And Gardner was married to my next door neighbor, Cameron, who became Al Balick in the Philadelphia experiment, marking me
Yeah.
after Kennedy's murder. And she was also married to Gonzalez, my uncle, at Borman Foods, whose whole family was murdered by semis after they missed them leaving church with my grandmother, Mrs. Fuller. So when they murdered my mother's family, they stole the patents for Chevy vans, all the buses in the country, and milk trucks, and the Fuller transmission we made in Battle Creek. And that's the reason they murdered my mother's family. And my mother was in the car, and she got tossed out of the car. So when it exploded and caught on fire, she didn't die. But she was raised in a foster home. And then her sister Gardner wasn't in the car at church, so she lived through it too, as did her her sister Christy. And Christy was married to a man from London, and my mother's friends were Miller, who became Agatha Christie, and none of this is coincidence.
Right. And they ran the Hell's Angels too, didn't they?
What's that?
Christie ran the Hell's Angels too, didn't he?
Well, not my uncle Christie, but his family, yes, and they were from Canada. And another Hell's Angel was just arrested, and I showed you the news article. And his name was Christie, wasn't it?
I missed it, but I don't remember, but I believe you.
And that just happened this past 2 weeks. He was arrested in another country selling drugs and laundering money. And that's the Christie family also. So my whole life has been people stealing from me as they murder my family members. And I became a publisher, and then all of New York and 2,500 American corporations stole my federal license worth $3 trillion with patents for buses, the Chevy van, milk trucks, and the Fuller transmission that goes into every semi on Earth. So I was in the middle of all of that the day I was born. And my mother.
Now, you mentioned King earlier, Hugh, and would that mean that author Stephen King would be related to President Ford, who was king?
I really don't know, Greg. Susan King is one of my aunts, and I've been related to the King family all my life. And I've noticed that some of Stephen King's books are stories that my uncle Squire would tell me sitting around campfires like the one behind me here.
Yeah.
Some of those stories he told were stories my uncle told him when he was a kid. And my uncle would make them up at the spur of the moment. So I have pictures going back to when I was 3 years old with the King family sitting next to me. And you got the Bachman books when my lead guitar player was Doug Bach, who became CIA. I'm pretty sure that Stephen King was there to mark me with people like the Clown. Didn't he write Penny the Clown, that horror book, as Cummins stole my trademark Bottomline with DuPont? He lives in Maine, and that's up where my family created the entire country from.
Yeah. And then we came here, and DuPont's making movies right here on George Washington's land, right there where Borman was the first governor here in West Virginia. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and all of that has to do with them stealing my life and murdering
Yeah,
4 of my wives and murdering kids around me for 70 years for money. And
right, right.
DuPont is French, and I lived next to the head of the French underground my entire life. He lived across the street from me. His name was Holstein from World War
Yeah.
II. And Holstein would do the Russian Cossack at 80. And Gene, she would come and to my performances. He was there, and they were marking
You
me
talking
and
about that
stealing
thing
my
where
money.
your feet up real high?
They were marking me stealing my money via DuPont.
Yeah. The
And
Cossack, that's where they kick
I
feet up,
can't,
right?
I can't prove these things. I don't have the paperwork to prove it. It's just I grew up knowing these things.
Well, I
Holstein,
mean, you've got pictures of you and Holstein. At least, I've
Holstein's
seen
daughter
those.
was Angie and Stones after they sang "Sympathy for the Devil," killed the Kennedys. After all, it was me and Hugh. And I signed his contract so he could play in America at the concerts he played in. Then he went back to Canada and he got put in jail for distributing the same drugs I stopped on my farm 20 years later. He also wrote a song after Sympathy for the Devil, in which he says he murdered Kennedy, called Angie. And Angie was Holstein's neighbor, and Holstein was part of the French underground in World War II. These things are not coincidence in my life. And it was all about them stealing my business, my name, and using it worldwide. After Frank Sinatra and Gould and Ted Kennedy made me a publisher in fully federal court. And then they blew up my receipts in my civil rights case in the Pentagon and in the Twin Towers on 9/11. And they blame Muslims. Muslims didn't have anything to do with this. I was surrounded by Muslims in Detroit, and Muslims never hurt me or hurt my wives or hurt my kids. Christians always did, and it was always about stealing money from me. They would murder my wives and kids to steal trademarks, patents, and real money from me.
Yeah.
And that's why I make these videos, Greg.
Yeah.
I think I made my point. On the day I stopped Noriega's gun and drug trade run by the CIA and the Senate on my Utica, Michigan farm bought from Lazar, who was Trump's tax attorney back in 1979, Giles sold me the farm. He introduced me to Lazar, telling me it was a good place for me to live. And it was nothing more than an illegal drug trade run by the Senate. So when the first kids were overdosed in my driveway, as soon as I realized that, I stopped it. I called the FBI and the police, and then the FBI and police put me in jail for a year, and they made movies about all the drug dealers. So I know it was a Senate gun and drug trade because they turned all the dealers into stars in Hollywood movies. And
Yeah, they covered it up real good.
I was the publisher. Bottomline, everybody stole. You got Dateline, Nightline. It was all feeding off of my Bottomline as I played at Gene's Club, which was the largest club outside of Detroit. And I was making $6,000 a week playing with bands like Badfinger.
Yeah.
My band replaced me with Aaron, who became Aaron's Rentals, as Aaron Elvis Presley died on a toilet of a drug overdose. And that's how I was raped by the families of 5 governors, chained to a toilet next to my identical twin. And we were kidnapped on the same day and introduced with Camille Sirhan in kindergarten. We were 4 years old. This is real history I'm putting in these videos, but nobody knows it because Senator Graham's family, the Graham owns all the media in Detroit. Patterson and Brooks, my own aunt and uncle, their family covered up my kidnap and my rape and torture and the murder of my twin with Camille Sirhan. And then 11 years later,
Right.
they framed Sirhan for Bobby Kennedy's murder, and Sirhan was actually trying to protect Bobby Kennedy. And Sirhan is my cousin, and so is Bobby Kennedy. Everything they've taught you since you were born, Greg, is just a big lie from the CIA and the FBI that kidnapped me at 4. And they murdered Admiral Byrd too on the day
They messed up that story about your airplane flight 255. You were about to get on the airplane 10 years to the day after Elvis died, and they poisoned your coffee before you even got on the plane, or they would have killed you.
I had left IBM with Jim Fugit and Anthianetta Washington, and her brothers were linebackers on the Chicago Cubs and the Detroit Lions.
But now you saw that take a drink of that coffee that you drank, and that's probably why the flight went down.
I watched the pilot get the same coffee I had.
Yeah.
And the waitress told us all that it was just made. So the waitress poisoned it, and she was not Muslim.
Right.
She was a white American working in a restaurant that owed me $8,000.
And then they called that little girl that survived Sheehan, I think, if I remember right.
Yeah, just like Sirhan in the book that when they told you to kill Kennedy. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
All of this, everything they've said about Kennedy, JFK.
Oh, and she was 4. She was 4 years old.
Yeah, my age when I was kidnapped.
Yeah.
I'm well aware of all of this, Greg. And Denzel Washington, my girlfriend, secretary at that time was Anthianetta Washington. I wrote a song about her on my Facebook. It's called Anthianetta. That's Anthianetta Washington. And her family were people like Denzel Washington and linebackers on Chicago, NFL, and Detroit Lions. Those were her brothers. And she was my friend. We hung out together for years. She was my secretary at IBM on the day. I left her at IBM with Jim Fugit on the day the plane crashed, and I was on my way to Phoenix, Arizona.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had just gotten off a bus with Eddie Murphy and Gilbert Hill in Detroit. And now you have Kamala Harris, another prosecutor from California where they made the movies, who I'm sure she knows Gilbert Hill, the prosecutor, had a chief of police in Detroit, and L. Brooks Patterson, the prosecutor in Oakland County. I'm sure she knows who those people are. And they're hiding me with my own mother's name, Harris. And she's not my family. There's no people from Indonesia in my family.
Right.
So Kamala Harris, her family sold slaves. My family was with Lincoln stopping slavery. Clara Harris, that's my family. They're in the Smithsonian with Harris Steam Thrashers and Massey Ferguson, and that's when you got Madonna. My brother married Donna Massey.
Yeah.
Then while he was married to Donna Massey, he and all my friends and my own parents tried to steal my business, Bottomline. It didn't work out for them because the person they replaced me with was dead 2 weeks later. And I didn't kill him. I didn't even know who he was until after the fact. And then Westhouse, which is like Westfall, entered my life as Westfall died. And that's not coincidence. Her family was mafia. Her father was a state policeman, and that state policeman buried Jimmy Hoffa under my horse in New Haven, Michigan. And I don't think these things, I know it. That family tried to murder me 3 times. And they sang about it on the radio as they tried to murder me.
Well, I think they still are. I think it's been more than 3 times.
Yeah, I know that.
Those are your headlights out, probably.
They murdered my next 2 fiancés and 2 wives. On the Manning farm that Russell appointed Manning and Nichols to oversee. And Nichols was my alumni in Warren, Michigan. And Manning sold me the Civil War farm where they murdered 2 of my wives. And Indians were part of that murder. Indians, blacks, and CBS journalists were part of those murders.
Yeah, they were even doing that Apache war dance we talked about.
Alex Jones and Ted Nugent from East Detroit covered this up on the Alex Jones broadcast. And when they told you that Sandy Hook was a CIA hit, not real, nobody died. Well, Sandra Locke and Carmela Fox were my friends, and Clint Eastwood was marking me as he married Sandra Locke in his cowboy movies. There's no lie in this. I was driving truck for John Wayne. This is all truth that nobody knows. And then you pointed out yourself, why does every news station in the country use my trademark, Bottomline? After Webster, who funded my school, after Mitch Ryder, Detroit Wills, Bill LeVice went to the same school I did, and he was the #1 on Billboard for 3 or 4 years, writing songs Elvis sang, marking me in Vegas for Gardner and Sinatra.
You know, the major news networks are supposed to be competitors, but like all of them now have some segment that they call bottom line.
Right.
It's unreal.
They're using my stolen trademark. And everything I'm saying is truth. You've seen my trademark.
WWF does, or WWE.
I showed you the paperwork for my trademark.
Yeah.
You know that I have an IRS license for Bottomline that dates all the way back to 1963. You know, I was on the page of the Tribune, a publisher.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know all of these things. Nobody else does, because all the media. Back when all these things happened, when they murdered Kennedy and Hoffa, Fox News didn't exist. I owned Fox Entertainment through Tommy Volanda in New York. That was the Send in the Clown song I showed you. And I have
I took a picture of Fox News the other day, and they have a bottom line segment now.
Yeah, and I'm the bottom line. I'm the real bottom line. And then I
they can't get in that word either.
Greg, where I stopped the illegal Senate gun and drug trade the year after they buried Hoffa under my horse, I painted my house blue and black. I got that house from Mazar, Trump's tax attorney, via Giles, and you had Jay Giles singing about dirty laundry, and the Jay Giles band with other musicians. As I stopped the illegal gun and drug trade, you know, as Noriega and Fast and Furious. The senators were, and that's 10 years after they stole my trademark Bottomline. And it was $3 trillion in theft, from the federal government. It was $3 trillion in theft done by the senators and the president.
It just dawned on me. Something just dawned on me, Hugh. You know how the drug trade is always related to Hollywood, like you're always saying. Well, you had the Fast and Furious drug trade out of Mexico, and they made like 8 Fast and Furious movies. I mean, they even called it the same thing. They make it so obvious.
No, right. And then Oswald called Russia from Mexico, not from Cuba, because that's where him and Robert Tosh Plumlee were picking up the drugs for the illegal guns. Everything the CIA has taught you about Kennedy and Hoffa is just a big lie. On the day you interrupted me.
I'm sorry.
I painted my house where I stopped the illegal Senate gun and drug trade. I painted it black and blue. I got the house from Mazar, Donald Trump's tax attorney, via Jay Giles, who was on the radio. The Giles family set me up with Mazar, who gave me that ranch that had the drug trade on it, and it was the biggest drug trade in the country. They were taking drugs as payment for illegal guns being sold to Mexican cartels. This was in 1979.
That's why they were. I heard you paint houses,
I
And the
just
guy that
painted my
supposedly
whole
killed him was
house.
shooting.
I had a huge farmhouse and I painted it black and blue. I painted the trim black and I painted the whole outside of the house. I turned it from white to blue because that's what everybody was doing to me. They kept murdering me, Greg.
Yes, yes.
So I painted the house black and blue because I was tired of being murdered. And then you got the book. I hear you paint houses. And that's not coincidence.
Yeah.
Tony
And
Dogo,
the guy was Sheeran again, just like the girl on the plane was Sheehan. This guy was Sheeran was the guy in the book that supposedly killed him.
yeah, this is all it's all
People-
BS from my neighbors covering up where Hop was really buried. And Hop was
Mhm.
really buried under G&G, which is not Madonna. Now it's Lady Gaga. Same area. G&G is Gaga, and that's where Hop was buried. And there's no lie in
Yeah.
that. This is Mills and Bourne, Elvis Presley's publisher, and my other publishers who were my competition in Foley Federal Court in New York on Broadway. This is my competition, hiding
Yeah.
my truth after stealing my life and trademark in every country on earth. And they're still doing it.
It just all makes so much sense.
Well, no, it's truth. My family made the first TV series on earth. And I just thought of this last night in a dream, Greg. My family gave you Danny Thomas, Make Room for Daddy. It was the first TV series on earth. Gardner made it. Gardner is my family. Danny Thomas. Danny raped my daughter, kidnapped and raped my daughter, Dan Cooper. And Thomas was my wife, Victoria Milan. That was her first husband, who was a drug dealer I stopped on the Utica, Michigan farm in 79. Danny Thomas. Think about that. This is how they've marked me my whole life. And they do this to hide me. They make fun of me after raping me and torturing me at 4, murdering my twin in front of me, whom they kidnapped with Camille Sirhan from California and brought to Detroit 11 years before they framed Sirhan. And then they gave me the Civil War farm from Manning, who co-created the JFK archives with my alumni Garrison. And this is in all news. And they stole my trademark and my name and all my money, and I don't exist. I'm Hugh Francis Squire. Even the Pope took my middle name, hiding me. And he's communist. And then the sword George Washington gave my family in the First Masons Lounge is sitting in the museum at your house. Is that correct?
And all these names, like Gardner Gates, they follow him around, even buried here in this town and in a nearby town that comes from Massachusetts. All those names just follow.
I'm the guy that did well as a little kid. I created my own business. I performed in lounges at the age of 12 in Detroit. I was making $6,000 a week, and they stole my name, my trademark, and everything I have. And I'm related to George Washington and the sword. He handed it right to my family. And then they murdered my entire family. Every generation of my family gets raped and murdered. And then they tell you that they're the president. Now you have Kamala Harris. You have a Supreme Court justice named Jackson. Well, I'm Jackson on the 20. I'm Lincoln on the penny. I'm Chase on the biggest bill in America. And they all pretend they're me. And they're not. Nobody can be me. And they stole my entire life. I'm 70 years old. They stole over $3 trillion just from my business Bottomline. And then they blew up the receipts in my civil rights case in the Pentagon and the towers. The last plane that crashed in the Pennsylvania field, that was Victoria Milan. Her husband was a drug dealer I stopped in 79, Thomas. And it goes all the way back to the 50s when Gardner gave you Danny Thomas and St. Jude's for children. Well, in my life, Jude works at the Phoenix Center. And I was headed to Phoenix on the day Flight 255 crashed on I-94 after I left Denzel Washington's family member with Jim Fugit at IBM after my father-in-law, Joe Jacobs, gave Bill Gates the software to make his first computer at my wedding. None of this is a lie. This is all truth. And we'll end this video here unless you got something to add.
Goes together there. Just it's hand in glove. You can see all the connections going back hundreds of years in Hollywood and modern times, Hollywood, everything, and with all the books and the movies that are made and how it goes with the drug trade.
Booth was an actor on Broadway.
Exactly right. Killed at and Lincoln killed at a theater.
My publishing license comes from Broadway on New York. Clara Harris, my family member, was with Lincoln as his guest. This is not a pipe dream. It's not some conspiracy theory. This is truth.
Yeah. This is the real history.
Because they murdered every generation of my family since 1776. My own brothers and sisters are too ignorant to know the truth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Understand this? And they thought
completely.
They thought they could steal my IRS licenses and publishing license and get away with it. And they didn't even know I had an IRS license and a publishing license.
Booth was another one of the clowns with Milky the Clown. I mean, you can't get away from this no matter how you look. It's unbelievable.
And they had a clown union with Buzzo the Clown, who was my father-in-law, who really buried Jimmy Hoffa under my horse in a goat. They used goats for satanic worship. My wife and my lead guitar player's mother were witches. When I divorced Mary, she moved 7 witches in, 7 women witches. She was a lesbian. You understand this?
Yeah.
She replaced me with 7 witches in the house I gave to her for $1. And then they make me out to be the bad guy. I'm the guy whose family wrote the King James Bible. And there's no lie in that. Schofield.
Yeah, and then they threw Hoffa under some. They threw Hoffa under some dead chickens and goats and stuff.
The Mormon Bible. Schofield's the Living Bible, and King James, the King James Bible. And they all tell me they're Christians, and I'm the Christian whose family wrote all the Bibles you read. But I don't exist.
Right.
You know what's going on.
Reality. Yeah, I get it. I get it very well.
I'm going to end this. I'll send you the video. Put it up on YouTube. Anybody with a brain can tell I'm not lying. Bye.
Bye.